I'd like to welcome everybody to this May 2023 meeting of the Metropolitan Study Group of the SRAA. Thank you very much for taking the time to be here. It's lovely to see everyone as ever. And today we have a presentation from Frater Kevin. And what is the precise title of your presentation, please, Kevin?
The precise title is Reincarnation in Western Tradition.
That's what I thought. Thank you. Do you have any kind of presentation, like a PowerPoint? You need to share the screen?
Yeah, so I need to share my screen, but
okay. One second. Now you should be able to.
Yes, wonderful. Okay. So if you are okay, I start.
Yep. We can see that. Can you make it full screen?
Yeah.
Please.
Yes, now it's fine.
No, it's still, that's it. Perfect.
Okay.
So over to you, Kevin.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you for being here. Today I'm going to talk to you about reincarnation in the Western tradition. And I wanted to put this opening slide with a painting by Jean Delville, a Martinist painter, who depicts Plato's school in this work. And I decided to do this because although I given the title Reincarnation in the Western Tradition, I'm going to talk mainly about what defines Western thought from a religious point of view. So I'm not going to dwell on the school of Plato or the Pythagorean doctrine of metempsychosis. But however, I believe that these influences have in every way converged in the definition of Christianity. And we will see this more particularly when speaking of origin. And so this work by a Martinist painter allowed me graphically to link these two words. As you can see here, Plato is portrayed with a clearly Christ-like connotation. As for the agenda, or what we are going to discuss, I've briefly listed the points in this presentation, starting with a questioning of our certainties or preconceptions about reincarnation, especially in the East. We will then look at how to create a bridge between Eastern doctrines and the Judaic tradition, and finally focus on the Christian and Rosicrucian aspect, and then come to the conclusions. Does reincarnation, as we understand it, clearly exist in the Eastern world? Guénon, in his introduction to the study of Hindu doctrines, but one could also take other examples such as theosophy, history of a pseudo-religion, or the spiritist fallacy. Guénon states that the doctrine that an individual can return with different bodies to this plane of existence is completely heterodox from the traditional Hindu point of view. Here, in particular, it is said that taking the existence of an indefinite series of changing states of being. Yeah, are you able to hear? Is there a problem?
I'm just going to mute that person.
Okay.
Okay, there you go.
Okay, thank you. Here, in particular, it is said that taking the existence of an indefinite series of changing states of being, each with its own characteristics, and to make it a doctrine that bodily existence could be repeated several times is a huge misunderstanding. Similarly, Kumaraswamy tells us that reincarnation, understood as the return of individual souls in different bodies to Earth, is not an Indian doctrine, and that it is appropriate to ask what is meant by the term soul in both our Western and Eastern cultures before broaching the subject. So, to try to understand this better, I have referred to the doctrine of Anathman in Buddhism. as explained by Raula in his essay that I will tell you about later. As you can see, according to that doctrine, the individual is pure illusion and is the result of 5 aggregates, which are matter, sensations, perceptions, mental formations, and finally consciousness. Thus, the notion of individuality, understood as Kevin, as John, as Alexis, whatever, who return to this plane in a different body, completely loses its meaning. We see, moreover, that although there is no univocal correspondence between these notions of Theravada Buddhism and Judaism, in the Kabbalah and in a specific text, which is the Shara Gilgulim of Chaim Vital and Isaac Luria, we find the components of the individual. And these components, the part of the soul, are 5, exactly as in the Buddhist tradition. And that these 5 souls do not follow a common destiny once they have left the corporeal vehicle. They all have to return to a primordial Adam, but they may have different states of being and different fates in the afterlife. This is something we will address in a moment. So we get a sort of parallel between Buddhist tradition and Kabbalah. And here I would like to point you to some recent sources to draw a possible connection between the Eastern world, the doctrine of the Anatman in Buddhism, and the Kabbalistic doctrine, which dates back to the 16th and 17th century. I've pointed you these 2 texts. The first is by Walpola Raula, a Buddhist monk who was active in Paris and who wrote this splendid essay on the teachings of the Buddha. The other is by a rabbi, Rav Abraham Aryeh Trugman, who in this Return Again details the work of Chaim Vital and Isaac Luria, these 2 masters, these 2 rabbis of the Kabbalistic tradition of the 16th and 17th century. So if we take a look to the elements of the doctrine of Gilgul, what is the possible fate for these 5 different parts of the soul once they have left the corporeal vehicle? The first possibility is to make a return to this plane, and yet not as the individual to which they belonged, but individually, thus entering a different compound together with 4 other different parts. This is done with the purpose of fulfilling that duty or that purification which was not accomplished during earthly existence. The other hypothesis is that of a purification, a rectification, that the individual spark pursues independently before reintegrating the universal Adam. And finally, there is the possibility of the Ibur, which consists of impregnating a living individual and accompanying him or her for a period of his or her life, thus having the opportunity to perform that rectification that has not been accomplished. Just a curiosity. The novel The Golem, for those who have read it, by Gustav Meyrink, features a protagonist who has an experience of imposed memory after wearing another person's hat. He experiences the existence of another person, the owner of the hat. Now, in this experience, there is a recurring element that is a book, and this book is called Ibur. The author gives no explanation, but it is obvious that it is clearer to penetrate the meaning of those pages from this notion, coming from the Kabbalistic tradition, the notion of Ibur. Gustav Meyrink, by the way, we know that he was very close to the Rosicrucian revival movements of his time. But then, where does the notion that the same individual returns in another bodily vehicle and can be reincarnated in multiple lives, where does this come from? Somehow, this is a purely Western socialist creation from a purely materialist and immanentist perspective. Beginning with Fourier, the idea that social, economic, material injustices on this plane of existence can somehow be tolerated and justified if one imagines that in future lives, the same individuals will be subjected to different conditions, will gain ground. This idea became popular in French circles and conditioned, among others, Pappus, who wrote a book on reincarnation that was to be a cause of strong disagreement and break with Guénon. This text will in some way mark, historically, the proximity between the Martinist order and the idea of reincarnation, which we find in this Swiss doctor, Edouard Berthollet, who was the Grand Master of the Martinist Synarchic order, who will dedicate a ponderous work to reincarnation. And I must say, with various misunderstandings and leading everything back to a rather simplistic and immanentist vision. This is interesting because Louis-Claude de Saint-Martin, who is the inspiration behind the Martinist order, actually categorically rejects the idea of this type of reincarnation in his correspondence with Baron Kirchberger. He does, however, admit the possibility of the return of great prophetic souls who had particular missions to fulfill with respect to the spiritual salvation of mankind. And this is very intriguing because Saint-Martin shows himself sensitive to a type of reincarnation of a Kabbalistic matrix that goes back to Isaac Luria and Chaim Vital, and that is clearly found in Martinez de Pasquali treatise on the reintegration of beings. Now, where does all this misunderstanding come from? It comes from the fact that, as such, the concept of reincarnation refers to a form of benevolence from God, of justice, of fairness to humans. It overcomes the deeply traumatic idea that a single sin can condemn us for eternity. What, on a Kabbalistic level, corresponds to the benevolence, the Sephirah Chesed. Here is the Sephirah Chesed, meaning benevolence. Corresponds numerically to the term used in Kabbalah for reincarnation, namely wheel or Gilgul. So Chesed is the same as Gilgul, is benevolence. And all this misinterpretation came from this idea, the justice, the social justice coming from this source. And both these terms correspond to the number 72. Turning to the Christian sources, there are a number of gospel passages that are obligatory points in the discussion of reincarnation in the West, and which are often quoted. I've quoted 3 of them from the Gospel of John, which you can read here. Truly, truly, I tell you, no one can see the kingdom of God unless he is born again. John 3:3. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? John 9:2. And finally, they asked him, then who are you? Are you Elijah? John 1:21. Clearly, none of these passages are decisive and allow us to clarify once and for all the allusion by Jesus to the presence of a doctrine of reincarnation. Yet, it is evident that the problem lurks in these passages. And then we find a trace of these in a very controversial author of the 3rd century AD in Alexandria, who is Origen. He, in his book of commentary on the Gospel of John, expresses himself in these terms with regard to the last passage we have read, the one in which the Baptist is asked whether he is Elijah. This will be the explanation of those who find in our passage a support for their doctrine of transcorporation, as if the soul clothed itself in a fresh body and did not quite remember its former lives. These thinkers will also point out that some of the Jews assented to this doctrine when they spoke about the Savior as if he was one of the old prophets, and had risen not from the tomb, but from his birth. His mother Mary was well known, and Joseph the carpenter was supposed to be his father, and it could really be supposed that he was one of the old prophets risen from the dead. So here, Origen seems to reject this hypothesis. In general, Origen's relationship with reincarnation is very controversial. There are passages in his work De Principis and also in Contra Celsum that would seem to support the idea of reincarnation. In particular, Franz Heinrich Kettler, a scholar of Origen's work, defends the idea that the doctrine of reincarnation can be found in this church father, whereas critics today are unanimous in rejecting this hypothesis. Origen ultimately tells us that the question is unresolved from the scriptures, while his master Clement of Alexandria writes in one of the Stromata that the Logos shows us his mercy from time immemorial, and this wandering of ours in this existence is not the first occasion to experience his mercy. This, too, seems like an allusive sentence, but not a definitive one. We come then to the more properly Rosicrucian tradition. We have some scant evidence of a proximity on the part of intellectuals close to the Rosicrucian movement to the idea of reincarnation. I looked in Mackintosh's volume on the Rosicrucians, with which you are all familiar, for some possible clues. I found an interesting piece of information about Knorr von Rosenroth, an intellectual close to the circles, marked by a mixture of Kabbalah, alchemy, and Christianity, that had been created in Germany in the aftermath of the publication of the manifestos. He published a book entitled Kabbalah Denudata, which is a milestone in Christian Kabbalah, in which extensive excerpts from the Shara Gilgulim, the book on reincarnation by Chaim Vital and Isaac Luria, are included. I also found interesting the story of Franciscus Mercurius van Helmont, who, as Mackintosh reports in his book, was imprisoned in Rome because he openly declared his belief in a doctrine of reincarnation. What we see is that in the Rosicrucian tradition flows a Kabbalistic knowledge, which in some way permeates Christianity as much in its scriptural sources as in a certain type of debate that is animated in Alexandria in the 3rd century with Origen and Clement of Alexandria. And let us remember, as Tobias Churton shows very well in his Golden Builders, we can almost completely reconstruct a filiation from the Alexandrian environment to the first experiences of Western alchemy with Zosimus of Panopolis, to then arrive at the rediscovery of the classical and Platonic world by the Renaissance with Giovanni Mercurio da Correggio, and arrive along the same lines at authors such as Athanasius Kircher, and the confluence of this sensibility right up to the Rosicrucian manifestos. All this culminates in thinkers who are particularly sensitive to the doctrine of reincarnation. But if one of the main roots of the Rosicrucian tradition is the Kabbalah, the other is evidently alchemy. In the Hermetic tradition, there are seeds of thought concerning, if not exactly reincarnation, palingenesis. There are works centered on the possibility of regenerating plants and animals from their ashes. Many manuscripts from the 16th and 17th centuries deal with this. All this is summarized in a work that unfortunately only exists in Italian, written by two extraordinary researchers, Alessandro Boella and Antonella Galli. The work in particular is called L'Artificio Supremo, the Supreme Artifice, and reports, among other sources, that of Wilhelmus de Roo, who in his Chimica Vannus deals mainly with palingenesis. But if you want to refer to a source that is much closer to us, easier to find and use, Schwaller de Lubitsch certainly comes to mind. Schwaller de Lubitsch in The Temple of Man tells us that the salient component of the living being is the one in which a trace of individuality persists most. All of this opens us to the idea of a possibility of alchemical work that can lead to a new generation, to palingenesis, but also to the fact that material elements persist in which an individual dimension dwells after death, and that through them, the same path is continued through new material aggregates. All this reminds us very closely of the doctrine of the Gilgul. Thus, within the Rosicrucian sphere, there are two fundamental currents that define the doctrinal landscape, which are Kabbalah and alchemy, and both make the idea of reincarnation at least possible, welcome, accepted, and debatable. In conclusion, I always have the impression that the esoteric paths, be they the Rosicrucians, Martinism, Freemasonry, which I have not mentioned because it retains the fundamental elements of reincarnation in the 18th degree of the Scottish Rite, which is ultimately a Rosicrucian degree. I was saying that these paths brings us into contact with very faint traces, diluted over the centuries, which open our thinking to broader horizons and lead us to question our consideration of the spiritual world and undoubtedly broaden our horizons. Thank you all. Thank you for listening, and I'm at your disposal for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Kevin, for your presentation. And yeah, if you could, maybe I'll stop your screen sharing now. And we'll open this up to questions. So if anybody has any questions, please, for Kevin, please, if you could either raise your hand, just speak up, or raise one of the reactions, put your hand up via the reactions tab at the bottom of the screen. That would be very helpful. Just 1 second.
Okay, I think it's fine. Yeah, I'm not more sharing my screen. Can you confirm, Shin, please?
There you go. That's
okay.
it.
Thank you.
So yes, any questions, please? Let's see. Oh, we have somebody at Atlantis Bookstore. Who is this?
Hi, Kevin.
Hi.
Thanks for your talk. Very interesting. I was just wondering, just to go back to the point about Christianity and early Judaism.
Yeah.
I was wondering whether you had explored the idea about some of the understanding of reincarnation in Judaism. As I understand it, you could say there were three main parts. You know, there's the Sadducees, the Pharisees, and the Essenes. And I think of those streams, the Sadducees and the Pharisees, my understanding, didn't believe in reincarnation. But the Essenes seemed to be a belief that there was reincarnation, and they sort of held to that. And also that it was thought that there is some evidence to say that John the Baptist was an Essene. And since John the Baptist was Jesus's cousin, it's quite likely that, you know, given, you know, the religion and families and things, that probably Jesus was an Essene as well. So that you could kind of make that kind of assumption. So maybe that would kind of reinforce the idea that there is belief in Judaism about reincarnation.
Yeah,
this sort of makes sense.
That's very interesting point. I didn't try to read the Judaism at that time, at the time of the beginning of Christianity, but I went a lot of centuries afterwards to the Kabbalistic tradition. But it's clear that at that time there were different stems of thinking about the afterlife. And finally, the doctrine of the afterlife in modern Christianity is still a problem. if you read the book by Joseph Ratzinger about the afterlife, you see that there is no clear doctrine. There's no clear Catholic doctrine of the afterlife. So what I want to say, I'm clearly open to the idea that Jesus could believe to the idea of reincarnation, and he was operating in a milieu, in a context where this idea was discussed and accepted. And this is clear from the Gospels when he says, who the people say I am. And the disciples say, maybe you are Elijah, maybe you are an ancient prophet. So the idea was very clear. And for Judaism as well, as you say, there were different kind of ideas of what happens in the afterlife. We got a primitive Judaism when they talk about the Sheol. So there's nothing after your life. So you have to enjoy your life, and after there's nothing. And Jesus in the gospel tells us that somebody who dies with having had a bad life, he made a lot of sin, so he wants to come back to tell the others that they should be kind to the others to reach the paradise. So we have an idea of afterlife, which is called being with Abraham. So there's a very complex evolution in Judaism and Christianity, and at some points clearly there was this idea of reincarnation which has been erased at a certain moment, and it survived from the beginning in Alexandria. And what I found really fascinating is that in this book by Tobias Churton, Golden Builders, there is a sort of fil rouge between Alexandria and the Rosicrucian movement. So Rosicrucianism is a sort of hair of what happened in Alexandria, and finally what happened in this open-minded discussion about all of these topics, which are really afterward crystallized or framed up in a religious form. So I thank you for telling me that. I did not go in depth in that kind of direction, but surely it could be really interesting to broaden the horizon of the topics.
I think it does seem like there is a reasonable argument that there were beliefs about reincarnation. I kind of agree with what you said. It makes sense. And Jesus himself said, "Who do they say I am? Was I Elijah?"
Yeah.
There must be at least incarnation, if not necessarily full reincarnation, but there must be these cases of incarnation that he's hinting at. So yeah, makes sense. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure what your name is, but thank you very much for that really great question. Benny, over to you, please.
Thank you. Thank you for a very interesting talk on reincarnation. I had the opportunity to study the Gnostic text from the Nag Hammadi library. If you have found any thoughts that goes in the direction of the belief in reincarnation. And also I'd like to ask you why you haven't included, from the modern Rosicrucian movements like Max Heindel and maybe Rudolf Steiner and others who actually believe in reincarnation. That was kind of excluded from your talk, so I don't know why you did that, but yeah,
because I was more interested in the origin of this idea and how this could be linked to the very early Rosicrucian movements. But I just touched a little bit of this topic with Gustav Meyrink, who was close to all these Rosicrucian Renaissance, which is more modern. And actually, I excluded it, but it was my original question. So why today, if you are linked to a Rosicrucian movement like we are, or other Rosicrucian movement which are actually working on this inspiration coming from the manifestos, why would you be prone to accept this idea of reincarnation? Where does it come from? And I think that the more useful way to do that was to go to the sources and to the very early part of
Yeah.
our history. But another issue was the Martinism, because Martinism finally converged into the Amorc, Antiquus Mysticusque, and there is a sort of contradiction, because in the Amorc doctrine there is the idea of reincarnation, while in the Martinist doctrine it's quite controversial. If you go to Saint Martin, it doesn't accept reincarnation, while Berthollet or Papus accepted reincarnation. So it's so complicated now that I just wanted to ask myself, why are we prone to accept this idea? Why are we open to debate it? And how we can accept to be Christian and to accept reincarnation? Where does this could come from?
What about the Gnostic sources from Nag Hammadi?
Yeah, I know some of these sources, Gnostic sources. I should say that I'm not referring to a Gnostic sources coming from Nag Hammadi, but if you take Pistis Sophia, this is a sort of product of merging the Christianity and Platonism and Neoplatonism in Alexandria, as I conceive it. So my idea was to, again, try to go to the sources with origin, where this kind of Christian thought could come from. And I think, as I said at the beginning, the merging of Platonism and Christianity, this comes from this very open-minded Christianity which operated in Alexandria during the 2nd and the 3rd century AD. So I think it could be really interesting to go and read the sources. I don't know precisely the references to reincarnation in this text of Nag Hammadi, but I would be prone to think that all of this stuff come from Plato, and from the Pythagorean tradition and the myth of Ur, and trying to manage all of these sources with the gospel and with Christianity. But for sure, we are in the West, we are open to debate the idea, and we know this idea in its primitive form from the Greeks, from Plato, from Plotinus, and from the influence of these authors on the church father of Alexandria, I would say.
But in some way, I think the Neo-Platonists also influenced the Kabbalah, didn't they?
Yeah. Of course, they also influenced Kabbalah, but what stays as a mystery to me is this kind of correspondence between Theravada Buddhism and Kabbalah. I think that this is a pure Kabbalistic doctrine. This does not come from Greek sources. This idea of Western anathema, if I can say so. So you got five souls which are mentioned in the Bible: Nefesh, Ruach, Hayah, Yeida, but the systematic classification saying that there is no individual, there is just an illusory compound of 5 parts. I think this is purely Kabbalistic, and what I found really interesting, this makes an immediate bridge with the Eastern world.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Benny. I have something I'd like to just offer as an observation. When dealing with this subject, everything we speak about is theoretical. It's speculation, because none of us know, and none of us will be able to know until that time comes when we pass into the realms above. So in relation to where does this spring from, this potential belief in reincarnation from a Christian standpoint? I'd like to go on a little journey really with this. So 2000 years ago, at the beginning of the astrological age of Pisces, the original symbol for the early Christians was the symbol of the fish. And there's a lot of Piscean symbology in the story of the life of Christ, and the fact that a number of disciples were fishermen, and come with me and I'll make of ye fishers of men, etc. But there's a passage from the book of St. Luke. Now, I'm no expert on the Bible at all, but there's something that was taught to me years ago that really makes sense to me personally. It feels like it makes sense, which is when the master said, go into the city, into Jerusalem, and look for a man bearing a pitcher of water. Follow him, and there you'll find me. I'm just going to mute somebody. Follow him, and there you'll find me. So that there's an implication of several things there. One is that Christ knew that at some point in the future, we would be, so the man bearing a pitcher of water is the symbol of Aquarius, which we are just at the earliest stages of now. But it implies that he had a knowledge of astrology, and that at a certain point in the long distant future, 2000 years hence, there would be a return of Christ, or the Spirit of Christ, or Christ consciousness, whichever way we choose to speculate about what that might imply. So that also implies that if we are to look at the concept of the second advent, the second coming of Christ, whatever that may be, that implies potentially that Christ himself believed in reincarnation. So I'd just like to offer that, put that out there, and see if we have tumbleweeds or if we have some interesting responses to that thrown in for good measure. Any comments, most really welcome. And if not, Kevin, do you have any thoughts on that?
There is Kristen who would like to say something. I see Kristen on.
Hi, yes. When I was studying anthroposophy, Rudolf Steiner, it was mentioned that since that was brought up, that the fishes were such a symbol in biblical times, because that was the age of Pisces and they understood it. And if you've been to Egypt, I've been to Egypt, in front of Karnak, there is a row of sphinx-headed, ram's-headed sphinxes. And that was built, he explained, my professor, during the age of Aries, during the time of Moses, who lived in the age of Aries. I just thought that was so fascinating.
Thank you, Kristen. Alex, you have your hand up. Thank you for your patience.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just getting a call coming in. Yes, thank you for your interesting talk. Yeah, I had a question about the mystery religions, because I know that in my understanding, there's a direct lineage between them and the Neoplatonism of Alexandria, which you already mentioned, the Gnostic teachings. So, sorry. So I'd like you to comment on the mystery religions and its influence. And also, you didn't mention Freemasonry. I know you alluded to it, but obviously in the Craft Lodge, there is a direct reference to life after death.
Yes, thank you. I completely agree. We are not going to deal with that in details, but of course, there is a reference, but there is a reference of after that coming from a mystery, coming from the mystery religions, I would say. And this is really clear. I would suggest for you, I don't know if there is an English translation of this author called Arturo Regini. This is a Freemason scholar of the 20th century, the beginning of the 20th century, who wrote a book about the sacred words in Freemasonry, which is really, really interesting from a philological point of view. And in the last part, he says that the heart of of Freemasonry is a sort of mystery teaching. And this is a mystery teaching about the afterlife, because the main core of the mystery religions was the direct experience of death and of afterlife, which is something we are not very well acquainted with today. But I'm a physician and I work with anesthesiologists, and the anesthesiologists are parts of a resuscitation council. So resuscitation is something accepted by science on a very unconscious level. And the core of the mysteries was to make this experience of death and resuscitation and coming back from that kind of dimension. And we have got a clear reference to that in the craft lodges. I completely agree with you. What, in my opinion, we don't have in craft lodges is something related to reincarnation. Reincarnation as intended from a Western point of view, you go back as Kevin in some other form in a different body, or Kevin just does not exist. There are 5 parts making an illusory aggregate, and these 5 parts are going to have different kind of destiny after life. I think that there is no trace of this in Freemasonry, but clearly there was a trace of this in mystery religions. And I think that the myth of her from Plato, from the Republic, is linked to something related to mystery religion. But this is just my opinion, I guess. But thank you. It's clearly there is a reference to mystery religion.
I think that all of this is hidden in Freemasonry, and there are mystical sides of Freemasonry that one can find it. I think the whole focus of Freemasonry was on social welfare, benevolence, charity, and making the world a better place, making good men and women better. So I think that it's there, but it's certainly not expressed. However, I think that the idea of ritual and the idea of initiation, although it's camouflaged in Freemasonry, does go back to the Gnostic tradition and the ancient mysteries where this was essential. So I think there's a direct line, but it is certainly hidden.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Alex. And Simone, over to you, please.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. I have just a very short question for Kevin. I really appreciated the presentation, and I kind of understood that in original Christianity, reincarnation was, I would say, evident, but somehow with the Catholic Church, then it was officially cancelled from the doctrine. And I was just wondering why. Is there a theological reason or a political reason? What do you think, Kevin?
It's really hard to answer because, as I said before, we don't have today, if you are a Catholic Christian and I question you about your beliefs in afterlife, you would be embarrassed to answer. And you would be embarrassed to answer not if you are a man coming from the people, you would be embarrassed to answer if you are a pope like Joseph Ratzinger, who was not able to give certainties about that. So the construction of the doctrine of the afterlife in Christianity came century after century with the councils, with the idea of condemnation of the heresy. And they tended to exclude this idea because clearly this idea is a sort of threatening to the power. And there is no surprising that the same idea came from a socialist point of view and from a revolutionary point of view at a certain moment. Because if I can reincarnate, the power which I am submitted to is less, okay, forgive me for the same words and same etymology, but the power is less powerful, is less able to make a sort of constriction into my life, because I will come again. I'm more optimist. I don't tend to take a sin like a sort of a definitive condemnation. And from a Kabbalistic point of view, I always have the chance of a tikkun, of a rectification. So I think that the idea of the exclusion of this idea of reincarnation coming from over the century had clearly a political reason behind. And it never became official and definitive. So it's a sort of surprising stuff in Catholic doctrine. For instance, in Catholic doctrine, you don't have a definitive condemnation of Martinist order because they didn't have the occasion to do so. And they never had the occasion to say, okay, reincarnation is wrong. We don't believe in that. They never said that.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question for you. Do you personally feel that reincarnation is an actual real thing or not?
Thank you, Shin. This gives me the opportunity. I don't want to say the whole story because I don't want to bother you, but I was raised in a Catholic milieu with a Catholic education, and I was not used to consider at all reincarnation as a possibility. And this until the day I had two different dreams. One was concerning my future afterlife. I was a young girl. It was very odd to experience. And the other one was a really detailed dreams about the previous life in Naples as a Jewish doctor coming from an Hungarian community. And I found a lot of confirmation of that. And that was the moment when I started to be interested in Jewish doctrine of reincarnation. And I started to say to myself, it's quite odd. I can read Hebrew. I don't really know why. I always been interested in this kind of stuff. I always had a particular feeling and love for Naples. Okay, I'm a psychiatrist, so all of this stuff could have influenced the dream as a causality and not the dream be the cause of all of this. But I'm sure that I'm more open-minded to reincarnation after these two dreams, and this was the first reason to make all of these studies and to go in depth with this topic. So I'm open, and I would say that I believe in reincarnation as a possibility in the afterlife. Yes.
Wonderful. This really opens up the topic for me, to my mind, because we throughout history, as your research is looking into, really, is to try and find some sense of certainty. You know, people who speak with authority that this is a reality, this reincarnation actually is a thing. But of course, nobody knows. Whoever has written anything on the subject is doing so because of what they feel to be correct. That's all it's ever been and all it ever can be until we actually pass. But if we shift the emphasis of our discussion away from looking for some kind of proof by looking through history in one way or another, and we instead start to open up the subject, is what do people feel? What have people experienced? So I'm really delighted that you responded as you did and spoke up about the dreams that you've had. I've had a number of dreams that I suspect may have been some kind of recollection of a previous life, and yeah, very unusual, very, very unusual. I do think that there's a tendency amongst some people to romanticize on this subject. So people like to think they've been some kind of great king or something or another.
I've never been a plumber.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, or a beggar or a thief or a murderer, you know. But my feeling is that so here's another thing. We talk about old souls. And in your talk, you mentioned about that the belief potentially that there are certain people who have been reincarnated, certain people of a high spiritual level of being that have been reincarnated in order to perpetuate and to continue the work. But then that puts into question with the rising number of people in the world, human beings born in the world, so would that mean that all souls, you mentioned souls, personally I think it's the spirit personally and not the soul, but then that's a different conversation.
Yeah.
That we'll use that terminology because that's what you were speaking of earlier, that there are only so many souls, but over the millennia now there are way many more souls. So that implies that there are new souls which are born. And so when you mentioned earlier that there are some souls of an evolved spiritual nature who are charged with reincarnation in order to continue the work, what about the other people? You know, it raises lots of questions, this subject. I find it a fascinating subject. I'd welcome your thoughts on that.
The idea that great souls could come back in order to give us help in our spiritual realization and rectification is mainly from Louis-Claude de Saint-Martin. This is clearly stated in his correspondence with Baron Kirchberger, and there is a sort of parallel, meaning that there is a possibility. The normal possibility for the Kabbalah is that there is just one spirit, one soul, the Adam, and we are fragments of Adam. And there is also, in some kind of school, a precise doctrine of where we come from. We come from the eye, we come from the hand, we come from the foot of Adam. And we have to make a path in order to rectify the first sin, and then we can go back and reintegrate this first creation of God. So there is this idea of reintegration, which is taken by also Martinez de Pasquali, and who give the influence to Louis-Claude de Saint-Martin. But this kind of possibility, which is a concrete one from a Kabbalistic point of view, when you read Aryeh Trugman, Return Again, it makes a lot of examples taken from the Bible of who is who. This prophet used to be another one in this book, and he was another one in the Genesis. So this is a way of thinking about the reincarnation, but it's a noble one. So you had your complete rectification, and God sent you back in order to help your brothers to go through. But the main work, the normal work, the everyday work we have to do is done by the sparks of Adam. So this idea of multiplying spirits or souls is quite interesting, but from this perspective, you can just say that actually we are all called to make another rectification, like as a bigger part of Adam, more sparks coming from Adam are actually on earth in order to make this kind of rectification. That's how I could try to answer to this question. Underlying that I have no certainties, this is how I feel, and I don't know, maybe because we don't know.
I really like that, Kevin. Thank you very much. Alex here has a point to make.
It's more of an observation, really, which goes back down to the concept of feeling about reincarnation. And we spoke about this, I think, yesterday, that though it seems to me the people that I've met over the years who are completely obsessed by money and only want money and have lots of money, all they ever talk about is money or power, or those who want to become a celebrity or destined to become, what do? They purely focus on that. And yet the people that I've come across in these kind of circles talk about and are concerned with concepts of life and the universe which are way beyond the material, mundane aspects of life. And from a feeling perspective, I've always wondered about, are those other ones the young souls? Because the journey that the people within these circles seem to be on, I never have a conversation that is concerned about mundane things. There's never a conversation about money. There's never a conversation about power. There's never a conversation about politicking. And have that reintegration process have we been the king, the politician, the murderer, have we been all of those things? And now that we have reintegrated in enough times and put those little sparks, those little bits back together, that we are no longer concerned with those mundane aspects. And the reason why we're sitting having these conversations is perhaps we have ticked those off the sort of reintegration subconscious checklist. And I've always found it quite fascinating that, the people that I've met who do have lots of money are quite two-dimensional and quite boring because that's all they talk about, or whatever. And yet the circles in which we have these conversations, the depth of personality, the depth of feeling, the depth of passion about the deeper mysteries of our existence are all, that is what people seem to be more passionate about and interested in than those other mundane things. So I think from my observation is have that the feeling of proof or just that sense of where we are on an individual journey, that perhaps do we have, without it sounding arrogant, but are you able to spot a younger soul? Are you able to feel a younger soul? Are you able to help? Are we all here to help a younger soul? I don't know. It's just one of the observations that I've made on my journey about people who are able to have these discussions. Like, have we been here before to the point where we have put down our childish things and we are no longer playing with those childish things? So it's just an observation, really.
I think it's really interesting, and it's linked to the danger of being arrogant, but we should however try to answer and to go in depth with this observation you're doing. When you study alchemy, you can have this kind of question: if you can live forever and you can have all the gold you're looking for in your life, you can have it as you wish, why wouldn't you spend all your time doing this? And what René Guénon answers to this question is, when you reach the spiritual level needed to make the stone, you're no more interested in this kind of stuff. You're no more interested in eternal life and golden. And it happens to me to know these two researchers, Antonella Galli and Alessandro Boella, who spent 20 years of their life studying manuscript, 10 hours per day of the alchemist tradition. And they're clear about that. They say that the final goal of alchemy is being inhibited by charity, by love for the humankind, and the stone is just a passage. So I don't know if we are at this stage, because we are at this stage. We can spend 1 hour or more of our time discussing reincarnation. We're not interested in modern topics, as you said. Does this come from a previous life or not? We cannot answer in a definitive way, but it's a sort of duty to us to be conscious of this peculiarity, to work on this with our rituals, with our institution, to improve ourselves. And I think that the best way to share this with the other is it's a sort of charismatic gift. People start to ask you, how could you be so happy, joyful? How could you be interested in this stuff? And finally, this kind of light up a new light in their life, because it's really sad to be an alchemist, because an alchemist is a man, is a woman, and to spend all of your life just making gold when you can make some more and more interesting stuff of your life. I don't know if this answer, but this was the first association I had with your reflection.
Thank you. Leo, over to you. Thanks for being patient, Leo.
Thank you, no problem. It is such an interesting discussion. So even listening is quite rewarding. So first, Kevin, thank you for raising this issue. It is such an interesting topic, and thank you also for the excellent presentation of it. I would just like to express my understanding of this origins, how I understand it from the Christianity sources. And if we stop just on the canonical text from New Testament, it is quite clear that they accepted reincarnation as a fact. And why it is not mentioned more times than it is, I think it is just because it was so generally accepted as the fact, well, as the understanding, maybe, if not a fact in this milieu. So it is one particular place where it is explicitly mentioned is in Titus. I don't know if it was mentioned in your presentation, maybe it was already mentioned, but it is explicitly said that where Titus is referring to Jesus, that Jesus is here came to wash us from the rebirth, explicitly saying the word rebirth, and then he is enabled us to renew ourselves through the Holy Spirit, which is quite explicitly. And also there are some other places, I think you mentioned it, where they are referring to John the Baptist as Elijah, and then John the Baptist says, "I'm not Elijah," which where he does not say anything against the possibility of rebirth, but just that he is not Elijah. And Jesus, on the other hand, in some other place, I think in Matthew, is explicitly again saying that Elijah was there already, but was not recognized by the others. So I believe it is just a normal understanding that reincarnation exists. Now, what is reincarnated is another issue. What is this entity? What is this? Is it the soul? Is it some spark of original Adam, and how to understand it? This thing that is reincarnated, or that we can understand as is reincarnated, is another issue, and I think this is a interesting question also to the others. How do you consider the entity which is supposed to be reincarnated? Thank you.
Thank you, Leo. I see that somebody maybe would like to answer.
If there is, then please go ahead, whoever you are, if you'd like to respond to that, rather than Kevin, please go ahead.
Hi, Kevin, and thank you for your presentation. When we're talking about such a topic, we need to understand that reincarnation means cycles. And when we are talking about cycles, we need to understand that we can find this in every spiritual path. In Muslim mystical path, we can find in Sufi path, yes, these cycles. And they are doing the same science, the same circles in order to understand their own path. When we are in our path, in the Christian path, we have the heart prayer, and we are saying the same words again, in order to perform something. But even more, in Kabbalah, when we are talking about the practical Kabbalah, we know that in practical Kabbalah, we can start another tree, a Kabbalistic tree from every single Sephirah. And Malchut can become Keter, and Keter can become Malchut. And this means we need to go through every single Sephirah. And after that only, when we are able to start a new tree from every single Sephirah, we can achieve the final goal, to be in all the three, not in only one. And this is why the Kabbalists, they can apply the Kabbalistic tree to a situation, to a case, to every single daily thing what we are doing. In Magnum Opus, we are doing the same. and it doesn't matter which path we are on, the dry path, wet path, or even the shortest one, the royal path. We are doing the same. We are doing the same things, the same operations over and over, just to understand how the nature is working. And the final goal is to understand that the nature means a chain of circles. And when we understand this, we can see it from above. And from above, you can see that it's a spiral. And this is in our nature. This is the cosmos. This is everything around us. And even in India, if you go to Kashmir, in Shaivism, you will find that reincarnation means not that in one life, if you are a good person, in the next life you will be a man, or if you are a bad person, you will be a dog or a butterfly or something like this. It's not about this. It's in order to transfer your consciousness and to pass in conscious. And this is even in the Gnostic texts, because in the Gnostic paths, you need to transfer your consciousness. And if you are able to do this, you achieve the final goal. And even if you can transfer your consciousness in Hinduism, you need to come again to complete your path. And to complete your path means to go through every single thing in your life, and after that to pass in peace. So this is in Muslim path, this is in Christian, and this is in every single spiritual path, and even more. When we are talking about orders like our order, we need to understand that many members from our order, and not only, they work the magnum opus. And magnum opus means to study Kabbalah and to do the same things and the same operations over and over. And this is only not to achieve to make gold, but to understand how the nature is working. And that's why we are stepping on the steps of nature. We are following the nature. And the final goal is to be conscious when you go beyond. Thank you.
Thank you. If I can comment on you and Leo at the same time, I completely agree with you. And the term in the Kabbalah for reincarnation is Gilgul, meaning cycle. So it's perfect. And as a psychotherapist, I deeply believe that we have reincarnation during one life. This is what Freud called repetition. So you don't resolve an issue in a certain situation, you are doomed to relive the same situation in different contexts, and you relive the same situation. And the goal of a good psychotherapy should be being free from this kind of repetition. Leading to what Leo said and you are saying, who reincarnates? It's really hard to answer, but you got a concept in the Kabbalah, you got the Sephirot, but outside the Sephirot, there is this Ein Sof, the wonderful nothing, the vacuity of intrinsic existence. And Jesus always speaks about the concept which is not really clarified in Christianity, which is the kingdom. And he says the kingdom is going to come, the kingdom. But if you go to the sources in Greek, is written engus, meaning here. The kingdom is here, is now, it's out of the time, it's out of limits, is this kind of Ein Sof. There is a great Christian thinkers who really inspired Louis-Claude de Saint-Martin, which is Jacob Böhme. Jacob Böhme has this wonderful intuition of the vacuity of intrinsic existence, the Ein Sof from a Christian point of view, which he calls Ungrund, without ground, ungrounded, Ungrund. And this is curiously the same term used in the Veda, Asparza, without ground, without. So I think that we are doomed to make this kind of cycles and cycles and cycles, because the simple fact of being is a sort of a perturbation of a state of pure harmony, which is this wonderful nothing, this divine nothing. We're all doomed to. And at the very beginning of Christianity, this idea was so clear. In origin, you got the doctrine of apokatastasis. Apokatastasis meaning the final dissolution, nothing, and everything is in harmony. There is no sin doomed to be eternal, destined to be eternal. Everything is harmony in the apocatastasis. So I completely agree with you. If you take this perspective of cycles and nature, you can see that Muslims, Christians, Hindu, Kabbalah go into the same direction, which is something really hard to penetrate for the Western minds. The idea of vacuity of intrinsic existence. It's more easier for the Easterns maybe. But we got our thinkers. We got Origen. We got Jacob Böhme. We got our sources in a way of thinking about that. Thank you.
Alexis, you had your hand up. Go ahead.
Just to follow on from Alexander, so one very quite modern person spoke about conscious reincarnation, because I think that's what Alexander was talking about. I think it's something that wasn't covered so specifically in your talk, because you spoke about the different aspects and about annihilation in Buddhism and in Hinduism. But for example, there's still this concept of conscious reincarnation, which exists in alchemy, exists in many other types of philosophies. Yeah, and it was just to comment on that, and also how your concept of reincarnation and your ideas reconciles itself with what's said in the Bhagavad Gita, where in the dialogue is that Krishna says the difference between me and you is I remember my past lives. You don't. You don't remember who you are. And how that fits into the whole concept of your talk, really. Because you were very specific at the beginning with your quotations on Hinduism. And to a certain extent, yes, I agree. I mean, essentially, the Buddhists and the Hindus, that's what they believe, that the self, our self is an illusion. It's Maya. But then with this conscious concept of reincarnation, is it possible, for example, to believe it's possible that you can become Krishna? You can become the conduit, the origin, the totality of nothingness and existence.
But St. Paul says the same thing about becoming Krishna. He says, it's not me living, it's Christ living through me. So we got the same perspective. And when you say, I think that the difference between the socialist reincarnation, meaning I remember who I am, I was a doctor in my previous life, this is illusion. When I in my interpretation in the Bhagavad Gita, it says, I know who I am, is that this is linked to the Veda saying, Tat Vam Asi, you are that. I know who I am, I know that I am that. I'm not this one. You see what So we go to the same direction. There is a strong connection between reincarnation and this doctrine we can call with different names, Ein Sof, vacuity of intrinsic existence, supreme identity, becoming Krishna. There's a strong connection, in my opinion. I'm so happy that this is flowing from our discussion.
Thank you, Alexis. Kristen, again, all yours. Hello, Kristen, are you there? You have your hand raised.
Kristen, you have to unmute.
Kristen, yeah, you're muted.
Right. So sorry. Okay. I say this in all humility, but sort of as an observer, because my life has been very different, literally since birth. At birth, which I remember back to birth and parts of the birth process, I thought I was an adult. And the astonishing thing was I remembered a previous life. And the astonishing thing was that I understood, and I still remember the day I was brought home from the hospital at birth, parts of the conversation, because it was so astonishing to me. I was using obviously other vehicles for eyes, because I remembered the ride home from the hospital and observing the streets and the stoplights, which I had never seen such paved streets and stoplights. And then I remembered the conversation. And at one point, my grandmother said, well, my mother was tired and well, you can put her in with her big sister. And I was so excited because I had a big sister. And then I was shocked that I was put in a playpen with a baby. She was 1.5 years. But anyway, I began walking. I didn't do baby talk or crawling. I just stood up and began walking and talking in sentences by 6 months. And I had this ability to a smell, a familiar smell, a sight or a sound. I call it transporting. It will transport me to a previous life where, like a movie, I will literally be there and relive an experience. And when I was studying Rudolf Steiner in the mid-70s, who was clairvoyant, I had the good fortune of having my professor was also amazingly clairvoyant. And we had the most interesting talks. And he said to me once, you will travel much of your life because it is very important for you, if even on a subconscious level, to revisit places that you had lived before, if even subconsciously to feel the awakening or the initiations or whatever that had happened then. And it really happened that way, that often in travels, I will relive experiences. And this happened in Florence, and this happened to some degree, I went to the Himalayas, Kathmandu, and most often in Egypt, and I've been there twice. I have so many experiences. I guess the first one that was astonishing happened when I was 15, but I'll just, be brief and not go into them all, but I will say that one time when I went to Kathmandu, I went in 2000 to visit a great cousin, I guess you would say it was mom's cousin, who had been a Jesuit missionary in Kathmandu for 50 years. And then when he passed in the early 2000s, actually, I have this ability to transport in spirit to other places. But when I was thinking of him when he passed, I actually found myself there on the other side with him, experiencing what he was experiencing when he passed. And he was immediately surrounded with so many of his friends. He was in his 90s. So he had many friends who had passed, and they were celebrating. And this was just so amazing to me that I could witness what he experienced when he passed. But anyway, without going into all my experiences of other lives, and what I experienced in Egypt, I just wanted to share that because it is the topic.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Kevin. I don't know whether you wanted to comment or respond.
Just to say thank you for sharing, and we can just be witnesses of this kind of experience, and which are precious. Leads us to reflect about this topic. So thank you for sharing.
Benny, you've had your hand up for some time. Thanks for your patience.
I think we can all agree that it is very sparse what we get of proof in the biblical text about reincarnation, and all the same is true also in some of many of the other scriptures that has been mentioned. But I just want to say that we actually have very specific descriptions of the process of death in many of the so-called books of the dead. You know, we have the Egyptian Book of the Dead, we have the Tibetan Book of the Dead with very detailed descriptions of what is going on after this. And also we have modern, you may know, Timothy Lewis, the Book of the Dead, which was, very popular in the 60s. But we also have from Dion Fortune, one of the members of the Golden Dawn, who published a small, very interesting on the process of death. I don't remember the original title, but I have it in a version called Dion Fortune's Book of the Dead, and I just want to mention this. And I don't know if you have any comments for that, Kevin.
I just wanted to thank you. I think that the Bardo Todol is the Tibetan book of that is very inspiring and very detailed, as you say. And this presence of death in a culture is really reassuring. It's a normalizing topic. So I would say something provoking. I used to work in a terminal ward of a palliative care unit, and I was used to see 2 to 3 to 4 patients die every day. And what I was used to think at that time is that I would have liked to take children at school and make visits of this palliative care, because it is part of life. And when you are faced to death, when you accept death, and when you start to reflect upon that, and when death becomes a cultural topic shared by people, source of thought, it's something which is really good. If I can say it so simply, it's really good. So in Tibet, in this culture, they have this detailed notion of death, and they say when you come to this world, you are the only one crying, and everybody's laughing. And when you get out of this world, when you die, everybody around you is crying, and you are laughing, you're smiling, because it's a good moment. So I think that one of our goal as an initiatic institution like Freemasons or SRIA or people involved in this kind of topics is to make a sort of normalization of the death. So thank you for sharing. And I didn't know the text about Dion Fortune, so I'm going to check out this book. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Benny. I also wasn't aware of that Dion Fortune book, but I'm also going to take a look, see if I can find that. Sounds very interesting. Alex, thanks for your patience. Back to you.
Yes, I just I have a few comments. First of all, we in the West tend to see the world through Western eyes, and we in the East tend to see the world through Eastern eyes. But actually, West and East are one entity, right? It's one world. And I know the focus of this is on Western concepts of reincarnation, but there are no Western concepts of reincarnation that are separate from the Eastern concepts, because we all know in history that the Mediterranean cultures had integration with India, with Babylon, with Persia, and later on with China and Japan. And so they adapted there was a synchronicity between the beliefs. In addition to that, the Kabbalah, which we say came through Spain, was heavily influenced by Muslim Sufi beliefs. So we cannot separate Western concepts from the Eastern concepts. That's the first comment. The second comment is about Kristen. She's very psychic, obviously. And many of us have experienced deja vu and other experiences of what we call past lives. Whether they are past lives or not, we don't know, but they could be. But certainly that we've all experienced that. And I wanted to comment again on the concept of karma, which we haven't mentioned, but reincarnation and karma go together. Because what's the purpose of reincarnating if you're not seeking, as you say, Kevin, harmony? If you're not seeking resolution? I mean, that's the whole purpose of reincarnation from my perspective. Reincarnation, because the laws of karma are the laws of balance and harmony. Whether it's in this life alone, as Kevin said, or whether it's in many lives, the natural law tends towards resolution. And my final comment is that humans think they're very special, you know, but actually they're not. They're part of nature. And as you say, Kevin, cycles of nature, there's birth, life, and death, and rebirth. There's spring, summer, fall, and spring again. So why should humans be any different? So I think that's what I have to say right now. Thank you.
On the first point, I completely agree. It's true, and I started my presentation with Genon and study on Hindu doctrines. So you cannot separate West from the East. But at the same time, I think that there is something I just mentioned because I don't know the source. I know that Genon talks about this, and he talks about a Muslim book called Musavatafim. And in this book, it said a man is placed in a certain point on the earth in order to see the sun rise always from a certain point, precise. So we are characterized by a mentality as human beings. So we are Westerns, and we are more acquainted with Christianity, with certain languages, and that's just a way of seeing things. That's not a reality. That's an illusion, and West and East are the same things. I completely agree, and we are forced and obliged to think in these terms and to always look at what happens in other cultures. Then you talked about karma. I didn't talk about karma because I'm a Western and I'm not acquainted with this concept. I wasn't confident to talk about that in front of an auditory, but I completely agree with you. There is a law, and this is a law of harmony. I think it's very more deeper than a moralistic law. It's a sort of law of nature. It's a law of harmony, and we are forced to reincarnate in order to go through harmony. And finally, completely agree with you. Again, we are in a lesson of the craft about nature. Man is nature, nature is man, and we are called to reflect upon this just before reflecting about the afterlife, if I can speak so and not be too open about an initiatic topic. So thank you for these comments.
Likewise, thank you very much, Alex. It's wonderful, wonderful points you raised there. Steve, please, you've had your hand up as well for some time. And again, thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much, Cheng. Can you all hear me?
Very clearly, mate.
Excellent. I've got a bit of a dodgy signal here. I'm just putting my motorbike back together. And when I heard Kristen talk, and I just dropped everything and put my hand up on the screen. I'm Frater Steve Watley from St. Piran's College, Southwest Counties SRIA. I just want to say thank you to Kevin for an absolutely brilliant lecture today. Really enjoyed it. The old synchronicity things come to play because for the last couple of months, I've been looking into this subject myself. So I've got a few things that I want to offer that sort of tie in with what you've said, and also a couple of things that Kristen said a minute ago. Because one for Kristen there, I can also remember parts of my birth and previous lives. And there's no way as a young child I should have known the things that I could have known. And throughout my life, as many of us have probably experienced, or we wouldn't be drawn towards esoteric orders, I think most of us have probably experienced very strange things indeed. And I mean, for me, recently, again, Kristen, I was in Egypt again a few months ago, and had a very, very strange experience out there, where suddenly I felt terrified and at home at the same time, and literally fell into a bit of an esoteric trance and remembered fragments of a life previous that I probably shouldn't have been remembering. And this sort of ties in with many other experiences. I mean, I can remember dying in a previous life by being pulled into some big horrible machine. Maybe it's just a nightmare, but it was a reoccurring nightmare, and it only happened when I was very young. So I don't like to see really look at the world from an Eastern or Western perspective. I like to see the world from a child's eyes, because I find that when we were very young, we were closer to what came before in a previous incarnation, and perhaps it was a little bit easier then for us to remember fragments of something that we weren't supposed to remember, perhaps because it ruins the experience this time round, or perhaps because we've got to do it all again to try and make it a little bit more perfect before we can ascend to those higher planes beyond this thing now. The last few months, I've been trying to break this entire subject down into something that I could maybe explain what I feel about it to a skeptic. And I know lots of people, particularly the people that I work with, they think Steve's a bit mad, and they would never end up in an esoteric order because it's just not their cup of tea. And the way I explain it to them is I say, guys, where do you think computer games will be in 1,000 years' time? And I think that when we start storing data in the very fabric of reality or higher dimensions, or even in DNA, when we start doing that, we might actually be quite shocked to find that these new storage mediums that we're tapping into have all been used before. I know that's a little bit off piece with reincarnation, but absolutely bonkers subject. But like Kristen said, definitely with you there. There's things I knew when I was little that I just shouldn't have known. One very quick example, about 2.5 years old, we went to Torquay. I'd never been there before. We all went off on a road trip in a car, and when we got there, I said, right, I need the toilet. And I'd been speaking or walking long, and I just walked off. And instead of stopping me, the adults followed me, and I went off down several streets, right to a public toilet. I couldn't have read the sign because I couldn't read that there's a toilet in this direction, and was suddenly confronted with a urinal that's 15 feet tall that was no use to me. And was that me remembering a fragment of a previous life in that place? Was that a genetic memory passed down from a descendant that's been there previously? Crikey, this subject is just fascinating. And Frater and friends, I just wanted to thank you all and give you a wave. And that's pretty much all I've got to say today.
Steve, God bless you. I love your enthusiasm. It's infectious. Thank you.
Love you, Steve.
Nice one. So here's another thing I'd like to add, is if reincarnation happens on an individual basis for us as a singular being, then what do people think about groups of people reincarnating and reconnecting on a higher octave, maybe in order to continue the work? And how might that relate to the fact that we all know each other in this particular way now?
I fully believe that, and in fact, it was affirmed in my studies that people do reincarnate in groups. Many people that we have known before. I fully believe that personally.
I think that the whole concept of harmony, of resolution, I mean, if you're going to reincarnate for that reason, how can you do that without others there? Because you've got to find harmony with other people. So obviously there has to be group reincarnation, whether that's your family, which is most logical, your nation, right? Your race, because there could be racial karma, you know, things you've done in the past that you need to experience and so on. So certainly, I believe that you reincarnate in groups, absolutely. If you're going to believe in reincarnation, then you have to believe in group reincarnation.
There was a talk that was given earlier today by somebody here. As Alex mentioned, we've been here for the last couple of days for a meeting of the High Council of the SRIA. There was a wonderful talk given this morning on the original intention of the early Rosicrucian manifestos. And one of the things it spoke about is like a prophetic impulse that came through, prophesying a time, an emergent time of the spirit. And you know how we've all, at some times, we've woken up really early in the morning before the dawn, and we just, for some random reason, woke up, and it's not daytime yet, it's not even dawn yet, but we might be wide awake, and we'll kind of sit there, and we know the dawn's coming, and we want to stay and kind of watch it. We're aware that the dawn is about to rise. My feeling is that those early Rosicrucians had a similar experience, except several hundred years before the potential for the kind of all-encompassing transformational process that they were prophesying, that they were intuitively tuning into. I'd welcome your thoughts on this subject as well. Kevin?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting topic, and I always reflect on them, and I'm still reflecting about what happened between the manifestos and the rise of the modern conception of science and life, related to the Royal Society mainly, which was a cornerstone in the history of humanity. And what happened, because at that time what it looks like is that this kind of prophetic vision regarding the three illnesses of the world, the poverty, the ignorance, and the illnesses, clearly. So there is the main goal of the Rosicrucian is to take care of humanity, and there is this science which is at the same time a sort of Weltanschauung, or vision of the world, and which is really linked to a religious spirit, which is really linked to a freedom of thought. And this suddenly turned out in something very dogmatic. I mean, a science completely detached from social aspects, from religious aspects, from spirituality. And I think that they saw something, and their prophecy is still to be worked and still to be put in reality. That should be a clear goal for us. There are some kind of scientists today which can kind of remember this spirit. I was talking with a friend of mine which is listening to us about Damasio, who's a great scientist who wrote the Descartes error, why Descartes mistake, why René Descartes was wrong about his conception, his dualistic and materialistic conception of life. I think we really need this new vision of knowledge more than science, and knowledge is aimed to take care of the world, take care of our brothers, take care of humanity. That's what I would like to comment about this prophetic spirit of the manifestos.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Benny, over to you again.
I just reflected on the connection between the idea of karma and the idea of destiny. They seem to be a little similar, though they are not completely the same idea. But I think in some way, the people who are here now and we meet, and I certainly feel that we have known each other sometime, or we have some kind of connection with each other, even if we are right now quite distant from each other. But I think also there's it's like to say it's a part of our destiny that we have this urge to benefit our world right now in the ways that Kevin described, with a new kind of knowledge, and a new kind of insight, and I think we have like a kind of common destiny in that way. I don't know how you feel about it.
may I comment on this? Yes, I'd like to comment with maybe it can look something really far from what you said, but it's not. There is a TV series from an Italian author. Oh gosh, a great one, the one who had this Oscar for La Grande Bellezza, the great Paolo Sorrentino, Paolo Sorrentino. And in the Young Pope, there is a cardinal at a certain moment who aimed to be the Pope, and is not elected. And so the young Pope is elected, and the old cardinal says, "You destroyed every sense of destiny in my life." This is really powerful because we need a sense of destiny in our lives. I think that destiny is a word we are acquainted with, which is really important. So the idea of taking every people we meet, every discussion we have, every single step we take in our life as a significant from a really semiotic point of view. This is a sort of symbol of something talking to us. It's really important for us. And when it is completely destroyed, it leads to mental illness. I can see this in my patient, the destruction of the sense of destiny. So I think it's something really, really concrete, really, how could I say, touchable, concrete in our world, in our vision of the world, and really important and really precious.
I absolutely agree with you, Kevin, and Benny as well. I feel that meeting the people who tend to be regular attendees at these meetings and people that I know through the interest I have in these subjects, that we've met for a purpose at this time. We know it's been divinely somehow orchestrated so that we can meet each other, even like this. There are people who I've come to know through doing these meetings who I've never ever met in person, who live the other side of the world. And yet I feel I get a sense from my heart that there's a connection and that we share some kind of sense of recognition of each other and acknowledgement of something which is shared. And I do believe that it must be for a higher purpose. It must be, for me, it feels relevant to the times we're living in and the potential transformation of human consciousness for the better. So we got our work cut out. Any comments? If not, then maybe that's an appropriate time. Anybody in London would like to comment or question for Kevin? Anybody at the Atlantis bookstore?
Thank you very much for your presentation. It was very interesting.
It was a pleasure to share this thought with you. Really a pleasure. Thank you all.
Thank you, Kevin. 1 second, please. There was a gentleman who just appeared on the screen who I haven't seen before. Who is that? Please speak up.
Okay, I'm just a visitor. Can you hear me?
Yeah, very clearly. What's your name?
I'm just a visitor. Kevin invited me. And so I just wanted to thank you very much. It's very stimulating, extremely interesting conversation and really great lecture. So I just wanted to thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Dusan. And I would just like to say to the other ones that Dusan is my teacher of music composition. And we had the pleasure and the honor to have one of the most important composer of our epoch today with us at the SRIA. Thank you, Dusan, for being here.
Thank you, Kevin. That's too much, but you know.
Thank you very much as well for being here. You're most welcome to attend whenever we have these meetings, third Thursday of each month. Oh, sorry, third Saturday of each month, same time, 2:30. And yeah, it's really good that you could join us. Thank you very much for being here. Kevin, what a wonderful, wonderful presentation and such a wonderful dialogue that we've shared with each other after your presentation.
Thank you all. And I really appreciated you were able to participate after the I-Council. I think it was great. And thank you all. I'm really happy about this meeting we had today. Thank you very much.
Likewise, and to everybody else, I'm just going to get the screen on a different view. So we've got the gallery view here, and then we can see how there you all are. Can see everybody at the same time. Alex, thank you so much for attending as well. Wonderful, wonderful to see you. Great contributions, great questions and observations. Thank you so much. Kristen as well. Everybody here, thanks so much for taking the time to attend. Everyone in London, love you loads. And yeah, take good care. Have a wonderful rest of the weekend, and we'll see you again next month.